Biden just came out and said the other day that Putin cannot remain in power, and other countries are like, whoa, like, shut the fuck up, because you may actually, this guy's already has got his back against the wall. You have media saying that Russia's losing the war, and even though Ukraine's putting up a hell of a fight, it's just not true that Russia's losing. And so Putin sees all this, he sees what world leaders are saying, and if anything, you want to stroke this guy's ego a little bit. You want to err on the side of, all right, what's the harm if he feels good a little bit if he's letting off the gas. So it's a tough situation.
Yeah. So if I can like flip your question around a little bit, maybe I don't call Putin, but I call Biden, because I think he has some leeway. Like Putin has, I think, the most agency, like the most choices to make in this whole thing. But I think Biden also has some chance to change the world for the better, or to help resolve this situation. But I think it kind of goes to what you're saying, but rather than just stroke his ego, what I think you need to do is give him an out. You need to give him like a future he can envision that he's in it, and that that future that he is in is one where there is peace between Russia and Ukraine. Like you need to give him like an off ramp so that he has a place he can envision himself landing that stops the war, but also lets him keep living. Because I can understand how like it's distasteful to think about giving him something or like helping Putin achieve his goals, when really it's about he's gonna do what he's gonna do to pursue his goals. So what you need to do is nudge his goals so that they align with yours, so that he makes the choices that he can make that lead to peace between Ukraine and Russia. So I think like one of the big concerns in Russia is that their economy is just getting smashed by these sanctions. Like they got basically removed from the international banking system. So like you can't trade rubles for US dollars.
Yeah.
So like they're super isolated, and like all of these sanctions went on at the beginning of the invasion. And I think a lot of people were surprised at how unified and harsh the West was, including some people in the West. So they snapped all these sanctions on that are like crippling the Russian economy. And if the Russian economy falls apart, then Putin's maybe worried that, he'll lose his domestic base. Then like no one's talked about what happens, like how do you get the sanctions off in exchange for peace between Russia and Ukraine? Like what are the conditions where those sanctions that are wrecking the Russian economy, when do those end? Because right now they're just sort of like punishment. But there's no incentive for him to stop, because he doesn't see a world where it's like, okay, if I get a peace agreement with Ukraine now, then the sanctions come off, and then, I have a future again. So I think if I were talking to Biden, I think the West and the US can take leadership of this, is like come up with a way, like make it clear that if Russia wants to come back into the fold, like wants to stop being isolated and wants to have these sanctions come off, that only is going to happen if he stops hostilities in Ukraine. Because I think, he's not going to stop unless he sees a way out for himself.
Get communication and providing a way out that makes Putin look good. That's leadership 101, because for Biden, he's obviously trying to be strong with his messaging. He's coming out and saying, take this guy out of power. But if you're trying to do what's for the good of the people, if you're trying to do what's good for global citizens, you may have to do something that takes that gives a blow to your ego, where people say, you're a cuck for Putin. How could you let him get out of this situation with that? But at the end of that tunnel is a more peaceful place than when you started. And I don't know, it seems like there's something missing. It seems like there should be some yearly meetup between all these global nuclear powers, where the leader of the largest nuclear powers, there's like 8 or 9 of them, something like that, everyone who has nukes. So you get Putin, you get Biden, you get Xi Jinping, you get Kim Jong-un, and then whatever happens once a year, you drop everything, and for a weekend they just all go party in Ibiza, and it's like where like it's like a Thanksgiving break. No matter what's going on in the world, everyone goes home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. You just, and it sounds like, yes, there's a joking aspect to it, but if the nuclear arms race is a dick measuring contest, which there are a lot of aspects to it that definitely seem similar to it, where you're just kind of building up shit because it's shiny and sparkly and you want more of it. Like a muscle car, you want to have the biggest dick in the room. Dick measuring contests end one of two ways. You either build up the pressure and you build up the tension and you eventually fight, or you go out, you get fucked up together, you spend time together, and you're like, oh, this guy, he's not so bad. We want the same things for our countries in different ways, more or less. So I don't know. There's something. It seems like there's a big void where there needs to be just this acknowledgement. If you could get something on the table between global powers where no matter what happens that year, you could be in the middle of a war, there's going to be a ceasefire for a weekend on neutral ground, and you just get together and you just hash it out for 3 days. And then at the end of 3 days, you go back and do whatever you want.
Well, I mean, look, so to the first part of what you said, yeah, I agree that, stopping the war in Ukraine, saving Ukrainian people's lives is more important than showing Putin up or punishing him or making him look bad or whatever. Like, at the end of the day, it's more important to save people's lives. I believe in that very thoroughly. As to the second part, I think, there was originally an intention of like, that's sort of what the United Nations was kind of supposed to be. And it's kind of just turned into another, arena where these countries kind of jockey for position and kind of try to throw their weight around and fight for their interests. The whole idea of arms control did come out of like the US and the Soviets being like, hey, we almost just had a nuclear apocalypse. We should probably, recognizing that like nuclear wars can't be fought in one. And recently the nuclear powers put out a statement, like a joint statement saying that, reaffirming that a nuclear war should not be fought, or like can't be won, so should not be fought. So like the idea is there. It's just like it often takes a backseat to like the crisis of the day that's happening. Back in the Cold War days, like the US and the Soviets would keep up doing a lot of their arms control stuff in the background, even when like stuff was going bad. Maybe not putting new agreements together, but they were still, working together because they realized that a nuclear arms race is not good for anyone. So there's precedent for that. But I think sort of with the fall of the Soviet Union and everything since then, a lot of the arms control agreements that were put in place during the Cold War have fallen apart since then. The anti-ballistic missile treaty that we talked about, there was another one called the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF, that Russia cheated on recently, so that fell apart. There's one called Open Skies, where they would like fly planes over each other's territory to check stuff out. That fell apart under the Trump administration. So like a lot of these like threads that kind of held things together in the Cold War have just been slowly pulled apart. Partly, I think, just because like after the Cold War, this like specter of nuclear apocalypse kind of died down a bit and it pushed to the background. And so we were like, okay, it's kind of like COVID, where it's like early on in COVID, they would, you'd have a big spike and then they'd ratchet up the measures and everyone would be wearing masks and stuff. And then as soon as the case numbers would drop, they would take off all the restrictions.